Hi everybody. I get asked all the time, what do you do with your specimens when it rains? Well, for light rain, I have covers over all of my specimens, so that's enough. But when we have heavy rains like we just had, and may get more later, I drop my shade cloth to help dissipate some of the rainwater, but I also put some plastic out for the specimens that are low towards the ground. So I'm doing everything to keep them from getting wet. Even though they love rainwater, almost all of my plants now are dormant and do not need the water. So this is what it looks like when the rain is happening. It's a little crazy, but that's what I have to do. These guys don't need the rainwater when they're dormant, and that's what they are right now, dormant. So here it is.
Okay, so if they're dormant, do you not water them at all?
Right, most of these are deciduous, which means they go for a long snooze in the winter. It means their roots also shrivel. You don't want them to desiccate, but they're not able to absorb water. So when they're dormant, so if you water them when they're dormant, the roots can't absorb all that water. They just sit in the water, and that's how you get the root rot. So at the most, maybe once a month, give them a little water so the roots don't completely dry out and desiccate. But that's all they need. And some of them, some species, don't need water at all. But you need to minimize, absolutely. The only time you can give them a little more water is if they're in an area that's in full sun, so they'll dry out quickly. But I don't get full sun all day, all the time, so I rarely water my plants, my specimens in the winter time. It's better to be safe than sorry. Over here, and let me show you. So you can see all my phaceas, I've trimmed them back. Now phaceas are semi-deciduous, which means they don't vine anymore. These normally have vine out like crazy, but you have to cut them all back in the winter time because they aren't really growing.
So how can you tell it's dormant? Like this still has green on it?
But there's no growth, no new growth. So there's no new growth. Here's a Gerodanthus, and you can see it still has some green, but there's no new growth on it. So all these phaceas still have some green leaves, but there's no new growth.
So how do you know, is it just the time of year based off of your location that you kind of know the weather?
Yeah,
it's colder?
Yeah, dormancy is based on the amount of sun exposure and also temperature. So once the temperature at nighttime starts to hit 60 and below, it kind of triggers, and also there's less sun. So that's when it triggers them to stop growing, which is why when they stop growing, the vines at the ends will all start dying back. But that's what pretty much, so it's temperature and daylight exposure time that starts to trigger them to go dormant. And they will stay dormant probably from October, November, all the way through to March, even April, before they start growing again. And that's always exciting. And you keep your fingers crossed that you want to see the new growth, so you know they made it through the winter.
Yeah, and that's when you can also repot anything you have, right? That's why you want to wait until kind of springtime.
That's very true. Very good. Yeah, you don't want to, you try not to transplant when they're sleeping, when they're dormant. You want to transplant when they're the healthiest and they're growing and they have good root growth. Then they're optimum.
Okay.
That's when you transplant.
You've taught me a few things over the years.
You're learning, Janelle. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So everything here is pretty much dormant. Some things are still growing, like these Discoria elephantippes. They're growing now. Some of the ficus still are green, but they're going to start losing leaves too. Mesticlemmas, they're still holding their green, and there may even be a little growth on them. But most things, my Rhaphioacmes are all my Rhaphioacmes are dormant. That's just the nature of my Pseudobombac ellipticum. They're almost all done.
That's the one all the way on the back right there?
Yeah, those are the big ones up there. So they're dormant. I'm gonna have to wait for them to grow. Those are old, those are about 70 years old. So this is a fun time for me. I like trimming them back. It's a lot of work, but it really exposes the magnificence of the caudex. So you can see the pachypodiums are all leafless, so they like a nice long snooze. But there's another pachypodium by spinosum, and they maintain their green leaves. All the ficus are all trimmed back. So this is an unusual time. Here's a nice cascading pachypodium, leafless. Adeniums up here, all leafless. So this is their rest period. Don't need much, just to be admired. Okay. That's why they're here.